Thank you, everybody, for coming. So my name is Ian McPherson. I manage the partner ecosystem for the media and entertainment industry at Amazon Web Services. And I have the distinct pleasure of getting to work with a lot of really smart people and innovators and disruptors. And there's probably nobody I'd rather talk to about that than my friend Andy. So Andy, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. So I'm Andy Schenkler. I'm the Chief Product Officer for Deluxe. And just recently, we actually signed a long-term agreement with AWS, where we're going all in on the cloud and basically moving everything from all of our on-prem facilities into a cloud-based strategy.
Well, let's start with that. So take me through the decision process to take a 100-year-old business and turn this into a cloud business.
It felt like it was time. So the decision is, it wasn't actually that hard of a decision to make the leap to go to the cloud at this point. I mean, I think everyone has gotten past dipping their toe in the water. I think what was probably more unique on the Deluxe side is that we cover everything from the creative aspect all the way through distribution. I think distribution has been, for the last several years, especially on OTT and pieces like that, you know, pretty much a done deal in terms of cloud migration. But for us, it was really about what do we look at for the next 3 to 5 years, and knowing that everything that we're doing now is setting up a complete end-to-end cloud transformation. That was really kind of the impetus for the whole thing.
No, that's great. So at Amazon, we take a very customer-centric view, as most companies do, but we really try to be obsessed about it, and we work backwards from the customer. So at the end of the day, for a Deluxe customer, what does that mean?
So for a Deluxe customer, I mean, one of the nice things, you know, about even our relationship is the fact that when you know, we engage with AWS, the question is always, how can AWS help you? It's very much about that customer first view. And for us, you know, we're trying to really kind of do two things. Obviously, we want to meet the customer's needs. We're very interested in what their thought process is, but at the same time, we're supposed to be thought leaders ourselves. And you know, oftentimes, if you just do what's requested of you, you may not actually be moving the ball forward. And so we take risks so that they don't have to. And that often gives them the ability to be more flexible and be able to kind of challenge certain, you know, conditions for themselves without putting, you know, their own business at risk.
So, and you know, the cornerstone of this is really around innovation, where we look at ways we can enable innovation using the cloud and on-demand, always available resources, and giving you the opportunity to change that customer experience. So the landscape has changed, and we see now, you know, time being so critical in terms of content production. How would you look at the evolution, where we are, and what the requirements now are for content producers?
So yeah, I mean, I think time is one of the biggest factors, right? We've spent a lot of time talking about elasticity and scale, and now we're looking at a world where, you know, you have, you know, Endgame coming out in a matter of weeks, and we're talking about global releases of content where protection from piracy or leaks of information are you know, so paramount in the discussion that we no longer can afford to have these windows that, you know, span over months of time. And so how do you ensure that you can actually meet the need of that kind of, you know, ravenous consumer experience, consumer experience, and, you know, still have a quality of service that goes with it? That is not just about elasticity. That is about, you know, QoS. It's about ensuring that all of the processes that you have are as frictionless as possible.
So if we think about the evolution of some of the innovation going on, we're into the cloud journey for sure, but we're at the beginning of the AI journey. So maybe talk a little bit about where you see AI today and where you see it going.
So I think AI over the last 2 years has been kind of, you know, obviously in its nascent stages. We've seen a lot of things where you'll see a bounding box around a head, or, you know, somebody will do some kind of enrichment of metadata and things like that. For us, you know, being on the supply chain side of it and not so focused necessarily on the enrichment of consumer metadata, you know, it's about, you know, again, that time to market. So you'll get thousands of components that are coming in, right? So the world used to be, hey, I finished a product, it came in on tape or, maybe a file, and it was all very linear. And now things are coming in kind of, a haphazard randomness perspective. And so we're using AI to do things like make sure that audio conforms with each other and do that systemically. And, ensuring that, where we're doing localization and globalizing it, we need to have textless materials, and then of course the ultimate goal is to be able to do transcreation and the localization of content, whether it's subbing or dubbing, and make that available at a really short timeline and also at a high level of quality. That's kind of the ultimate goal for this.
And so when we think about then, obviously you work with a lot of large studios, but when we think about the mid-tier content producer and somebody who's now looking at the options to buy an OTT, build direct to consumer. What's changed now? Because you've been involved in that for a while. What's changed, and how would you provide a framework for making some of those buy versus build decisions?
So I think several years ago, standing up an OTT solution was a pretty daunting task, and I think people oversimplified what it takes to do it. And for us as a vendor, we'll often get somebody will come in and they'll want a comparative. They'll say, "Well, I want all the features that Netflix has," and it's like, "Well, sure, I want $180 billion too. Who doesn't want all the features Netflix has?" And of course, they're not really in a position to economically build a lot of that stuff. There's been a level setting of those kind of things, and those feature sets have now become more commonplace. But then you start to see there's new types of storytelling, like when Netflix did Bandersnatch, and then there's all sorts of like really interesting, creative, and upstream decisions that get made that now fundamentally change how consumers are going to experience content. Take that into theatrical releases, whether it's on demand, things like that. When you talk to the mid-tiers, they're obviously just trying to find a presence for themselves, right? It's becoming a very crowded place. There's a lot of niche services. And so you have things that have, deep fan kind of engagement, which does really well. And then you have others who are like, I'm going to be a little mini aggregator, that's a very, difficult space to live in. And I think what we've seen is that originals content now, you're starting to get, because of not just cloud computing, but just how the technology itself is unfolded, the quality level of content that people can now create at a lower price point starts to make them actually major players in the space that they weren't actually able to capture before. So
it's funny you say that. So last night, is coming back from our event, I got in a cab with a guy who was playing his own music, and he was a composer. A lot of rap, but he was also he was in film school, he was telling me. And he said, I did this because I have a body of music and I can score my own movies or my own productions. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, this is fantastic because you have the ability to take and create your own content and go direct to consumer through some of the available channels, build your social following, and become your own brand. And he was, the wheels were turning, but he didn't fully understand, so I tried to write on a piece of paper, here's a quick menu. If you were in somebody like that's position, if you were, oh boy, I have all these tools available to me, how would you start with building your brand? Because solving the technology problem is not the issue. It's
right.
Where do you see the opportunity to take that individual and move into their brand?
I think it has a lot to do with what their brand is about. Between Instagram and Instagram stories and, even YouTube channels, I'm clearly not a follower of the Olivia Jade or whatever. I didn't even know she existed until her mother went and, committed crimes. So, but the fact of the matter is that, she's got 1 million something followers and 1 million viewers. And so, you get 1 million of anything and you're in a game, right? You may not be the top or something like that, but you're certainly playing and there's an awareness. So I don't think it's to your point, there's not a specific place you go. I don't think I don't think every platform is for everything, right? So YouTube may be great for one type of storytelling or engagement versus an Instagram versus Snap versus whatever other thing that I as a non-millennial don't know about, and who you're trying to engage with. I think what the problem becomes is what next, right? So you get discovered, you get found, and then you become part of a machine. And that's kind of where we start to play because, let's take somebody like Tommy Lahren, right? forget politics, anything, just from a personality perspective. This is a person who started with, her own site, was on Facebook, then ended up on The Blaze, then goes on to Fox News. Like that's a career trajectory.
Right.
And so a brand like that, you start to say, well, how are you going to monetize this next? Because you're clearly giving up part of your own brand now to be part of a Fox kind of network, which is, I'm sure not taking a small percentage. And so you want to have that independent control. And so what we're trying to do is make it possible that people can span that entire kind of creative through distribution model and be able to own that stuff. And you see obviously on the floor and stuff, pop-up channels and different ways of engagement. And it's starting to become much more interesting.
Right. And so, I mean, that disruption that's happening in the industry, you as an incumbent provider, you face that disruption, and it seems as though you're kind of trying now to get ahead of that disruption. How did you have to rationalize that?
So, I mean, it's a tough one to rationalize, right? So we, being a 100-year-old company, we tend to be seen as, we were originally a film lab, and then that transformation happened pretty quickly to becoming a services provider. And now we're having to answer the question of, is that really a business that goes on forever? And there'll always be white glove services and top tier stuff, right? Not everyone is making Star Wars, right? There aren't 5,000 of those a year being made. And so there's always a level of caliber of something that you have to deal with. But then what we're really saying is, part of what we've done is we've kicked off a project in the last 16 months called Deluxe One, which its entire intent was to basically disintermediate ourselves. Yeah. It was to create a platform that allows people to subscribe and use it, whether they're customers, whether they're colleagues of ours, or whether they're competitors, which is that's a pretty interesting perspective to take and say, actually, we're going to change our mindset completely and allow people that we've been competing with to consume the services that we used to only, hold for our customers alone. So.
Right, and some of this also comes back to the lack of ownership of the infrastructure, right? Now, I mean, we are trying to provide these things and manage your infrastructure so that it's basically, we talk about it as being undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? There's no value in competitive differentiation in running a data center. So when you think about running a global business and you think about how this changes the content supply chain with such a distributed organization, how does it manifest itself to the people working in Deluxe?
So there's a lot of change going on inside of Deluxe, culturally and otherwise, where it used to be you'd have these large pockets of groups physically located in a particular location. And what's really interesting is that tends to be, very focused around the distribution side and things like that. But when you move further upstream, the group who's kind of less likely to embrace, the new technologies in a certain way are actually the ones who have fostered a different way of working. So visual effects is a perfect example. For tax reasons and other pieces, they've moved to Vancouver, Montreal, India, China in some cases, right? So they already have a federated network. And then you look at other things where it's like, hey, I'm going to be getting assets in and I got to prepare them and send them out. And there's this kind of legacy mentality of, well, I got to do that centrally. And it's why? Well, what does it matter anymore? I'm going to facilitate that everywhere. So I tend to compare the media supply chain services more to kind of like financial services. You have very low kind of easy impact systems that you can put in, which to me is like kind of a QuickBooks. And then you have the SAPs of the world. And we're really talking about building large ERP implementations. And I can't imagine that there's a CFO sitting out there that says, I have to have everybody together who's going to enter a bill into a system because it's the only way it works. Their whole model is, let's get that thing out into the most cost-effective places we can and let the system provide what it needs to.
Yeah. So then we talk about the changing the nature of how people consume content, even first-rate films. Mm-hmm. And so if you look forward, what does it look like in 5 years in terms of theatrical, in-home, distributed channels? Is this going to change the way we expect to consume content?
I believe that there will always be event-driven films. I think, again, there aren't 3,000 Star Wars. There aren't, right, stuff like that.
Marvel will make a movie. And
Marvel, we're going to see 2 of those a year, and, I'm going to be online waiting to get those tickets and, need to talk to the Fandango people while I'm here. And so I don't think that goes away. But I think what we're going to start to see is that there's this different mode of storytelling, right? And that as people are, whether they're coming out of film school or whether they just have really creative ideas, there's their ability to express themselves in a way that we hadn't seen before because it was very linear is suddenly going to put new challenges on the way we distribute, right? And so we tend to have made it about, heavy technology. Like there was, 3D for a while, which was like the big thing. That's kind of been like, all right, it just happens now. Then VR was going to be like the revolutionary thing, but I still don't think we're really ready for that. So now you're getting into the choose your own adventures. You're going to get into like, these little quick bits of content. Like those are fundamentally different ways of consuming content that we need to prepare for.
Yeah, and then that promise has been a long time, the nonlinear or the user-guided story,
Yes.
right? Are we going to see that as a core offering, or is that still going to be an anomaly?
I think there'll still be edge, right? I think you have a very large and diverse audience, right? My parents are probably not going to sit there choosing their own adventure a lot. But you have a younger group who may not want to sit through, Endgame's going to be 3 hours. There's not, it has to be that level of tentpole. If everybody starts making 3-hour movies, we're going to see a pretty different box office, structure. So then you might start seeing stuff that's in 10-minute increments, but played out on a much a bigger scale. And so, maybe what we'll end up seeing is a movie that takes place over the course of a year. And you go every month to see another segment of it, and then who knows, right? They're going to try all sorts of different things, and what's different now is the limitation of certain things, like in theaters where you are still sending hard drives and satellite, and you're limited by the way of the distribution to an exhibitor. When that goes away, and you no longer have those limitations, what does that allow for, right? So once you remove that barrier for creators, whether it's the J.J. Abrams or the up-and-coming filmmaker, they'll take us on a new journey, and we just have to be ready to provide it.
So if I go back and think about Deluxe's business, and what obviously is now a more agile approach to running the business, what do you see as new opportunities that you're unlocking?
So I think the new opportunities, we've been part of, we have one of the largest global localization businesses that are out there. But now you're in a position to start to tap into people who have never really been able to financially afford to get their content everywhere. So we talk about the new golden age of television. We talk about the fact that there is all of this, content that's being produced. We're talking about the YouTube characters and things like that. And so suddenly you say, well, how do I make them global, right? Like there's still 1 million people on YouTube. Sounds like a lot because it's 1 million people. It's nothing when you talk about it on a global scale. What if you translated it into 200 languages? What if you suddenly gave them platforms for all sorts of things? So you need to be able to do that economically as well, right? They're not going to come in and say, I want a $5 million, picture deal to do whatever. So how do we start to enable them to have access to the same types of tools and talent, but at a price point that makes sense for what they're trying to do?
So what does that look like, a marketplace?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's in fact something that we're launching here at NAB, which is a distributed marketplace for all those types of services, right? So rather than, again, making it where everybody has to just come to one facility or one company, whether it's ours or others, we're going to start allowing talent, whatever that talent may be, register within a talent roster, and then people will start to put jobs up for bidding and stuff like that, and we're facilitating all of that, right? And that's really important, because otherwise there's a lot of times where people say, oh, I just need, to transcode something, let's just say as an example. There are plenty of services, but exactly, plenty of services out there, and Elemental's got a ton of them, right? But it's what do you do next, or what do you do right before it, and how do you tie that all together? And that's the piece that gets missed. And then we're trying to say, look, you can use any of the pieces you want, but it should be facilitated. So,
right. Would you expect that movies in the future are more automated in terms of CGI and the contribution for visual effects than they are today, or have we reached peak?
No, I think there's definitely more automation. I think there's AI that will certainly come into play, and I think that if we had people from the visual effects industry sitting here, they would be like, no, that's probably not the case. I mean, I think that's true for anybody's kind of business, but I don't see it as a replacement. And I think that's the problem, is that when people talk about these things, it's kind of an either or. And that's really not what it's meant to be. It's meant to be something that enhances, right? So, you look at an explosion, and it's like, how many explosions have been created over the past 50 years? Like, do we really need a new type of explosion, or can an AI kind of suss that out? Versus, doing something incredibly creative and new, which really requires, human thought and creativity. I don't see that, especially in the next 20 years, being, replaced by AI.
So, and then that kind of takes us to collaboration. And so, a lot of what we see in that distributed workforce is the need for collaboration. Yep. How do you see Deluxe One fostering that collaboration? So
tied into that marketplace is the fact that we're also now starting to virtualize all of the tool sets that are out there, right? Because, it's one thing to have a talent pool that becomes kind of federated everywhere. The next biggest problem is do they actually have the power and technology at their fingertips? And so how do we kind of level that playing field and give people virtual access to all of the tools that they need and keep everything secure? Because security at the end of the day is still, that's game number one. If this stuff gets out, it really doesn't matter if you have the coolest toy in the world. And so Deluxe One is really designed to, kind of, drive and orchestrate all of that, whether it's fully automated or semi-automated through manual processes. That's really what we're working towards.
Sure. Should we open it up for some questions?
Absolutely.
Anybody out here have any questions they want to ask? Andy or myself? No? Okay. So if I go back to the user experience, then we see the rise of esports, right? And the eyes of the millennials being taken away from maybe, and some of the dollars taken away from sort of the traditional entertainment. Do you see that as an enhancement? Do you see that as a threat? How do you view the millennial experience and expectation?
No, I don't see them as threats. Those are threats the same way that VHS was going to be a threat to, or recording at home was going to be a threat to the rental business.
Right.
It's just a transformation. People will just consume differently. Sports or otherwise is, I think even Amazon announced today that they're going to get under 5-second latency. That's a goal, right? That's a huge issue. We saw, people's expectations just last year at World Cup and things like that, where it's like clearly consumption of this is not, waning. Right. And so I just think that these are just different paradigms, and that what we're trying to do is figure out how do we kind of normalize that stuff so it can be unintrusive into that experience, whether it's for the creators or the consumers of that stuff. We should really be sitting behind the scenes and enable whatever it is that's coming along. But I don't see it as a model where one has to choose one over the other. We've seen the box office results grow, right? There's almost every Marvel movie hits $1 billion now, and it's kind of, if it doesn't hit $1 billion, that's a disaster. And it wasn't that long ago that $1 billion would have been like the most incredible thing ever, and now we've set it as kind of a milestone. And that's in the same world that exists all of the things we're talking about. People playing Fortnite, people on different social channels. So I don't think that you can look at that and say, oh no, it's we're pulling from the same pool. I think consumption across the board is just up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One more chance for questions, and I think then we'll just wrap it up. No? If not, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure, as always.
Thanks.